like we're good.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for hanging in there with us as we swap over. It's been very interesting to have a whole conference via Zoom. It's very exciting, but also, of course, you know, we have those bumps and hurdles along the way. I know my neighborhood specifically, it is full of people working from home and homeschoolers right now. So I've been having to swap back and forth between my actual internet and my phone internet to try to Bluetooth off of there. So very interesting. But you know, in regards to COVID-19, I'm just so glad that everyone's here. We're sending you guys, you know, healthy wishes. So thank you so much for, you know, with all your different barriers going on, still making it today. So I am Dr. Nicole Arcuri Sanders. I'm core faculty over at Capella University. The military population is definitely something that I'm extremely passionate about, and finding avenues in which to work with the military to destigmatize seeking mental health services has been something not only of a goal, but really advocacy efforts of mine for some time. So you have to get creative, right, when we're destigmatizing. So I'm really excited to be able to be here with you today and to talk about this presentation about how nature can really do that, which is really exciting because it kind of aligns with what is happening right now with COVID-19, right? They keep telling us to get out, you know, go for a walk, stay 6 feet apart, right? But to go do these things. So really excited to kind of bridge that into today's presentation as well. And then I will turn it over to Kellie to introduce yourself. I'm so excited she's here with me, still kind of on this good journey, I like to call it. We've definitely been partnering up for quite some time now on trying to get advocacy efforts for this population. So, so excited to have you guys all here with us.
So I'm Kellie Forziat-Pytel. I'm a third-year doctoral candidate at Penn State University. I started working with Dr. Arcuri Sanders about 3 years ago, I think it is now, 3 or 4. And we've really connected on research related to the military, given our, you know, shared connection to it personally, as well as professionally. One thing that we've really noticed, as she mentioned before, are barriers to working with this group and really connecting and being creative in our approaches related to counseling. So I'm really excited today about looking at how we can better utilize nature that's all around us to really connect with this group. So if there's nothing else.
So what we're hoping to accomplish today, to give a little bit of a background in regards to military culture, it's kind of a whole new beast, I like to say. It's got a lot of different variances that whether we are having no experience with the military before, or we have had experience, even personal experience, that we need to be cognizant of when working with this population to best service them. We won't go into too much detail just because of time. However, we do have tons of information in our resources and so forth throughout not only the presentation, but also in our reference list. So if you need any more background to that as well. The next thing that we wanted to talk about is really exploring what nature-based interventions are and how they play a part in possibly being able to reduce the stigma for work with the military population in regards to mental health treatment. And then lastly, we want to provide you with practical strategies. So when you actually leave this session, you feel like you have something hands-on, tangible that you can actually leave today with and work with your clients with using. And the kind of the unique thing that is very fitting for what is happening with our time is we're going to be talking about not only infusing nature-based interventions in the face-to-face setting, but but also the distance counseling settings. So just to kind of get us started, making sure we're all awake, we're not, dealing with those hunger pains from lunch if you haven't got there quite yet, feel free to kind of just join us in the chat box and, just kind of jot some ideas down. There's no right or wrong answer. Just, when you hear nature-based interventions, what do you think of specifically? What comes to mind for you? Just feel free to notate whatever. See, hiking. That sounds good right about now. I can get some 6 feet apart from everyone too, right? Walks, animal-assisted therapy, grounding, talking in the woods, mindful practices outside, yoga, outdoor yoga. Yeah, these are some great things. Nature, outside activities with therapy. Yes, just being outside. So here are some of these things that have been mentioned here in our chat box, but also some other terminology that you might come up with when thinking of nature-based interventions. So ecotherapy, nature therapy, green therapy, forest therapy, terrapsychology, deep ecology, animal-assisted therapy, nature meditation, and horticulture therapy. We're going to go through some of these, what they look like, how to infuse them, and also look at some specific activities that are going to be related to the military population and what would be effective in working with them. Okay, so interventions. The biggest thing that I really want you to take away from just exploring the idea of nature-based, hearing that word, is the fact that nature is included. Nature, in fact, is the most therapeutic component of nature-based therapy. So it is not just talk therapy. Nature actually plays a big role in it. There is a relationship that individuals have with nature. It's going to look a little bit different for every person, and we're going to specifically focus on what's going to work best for our military connected population here today. And when I say military connected, that can mean the active duty service member, it can mean a reservist, it can mean a veteran, and it can also include their family members. Something, if you to look at definitions by the Department of Defense, right, they notate the family members as dependents, and dependents are usually the spouse or children. I often joke, I am a military spouse, and I joke with my husband, I do not depend on you. But it looks different though for every different provider. And what I mean by that is there are certain programs that extend beyond what the typical definition of a dependent is. So girlfriends, boyfriends, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. So when we talk about military connected, any individual client that is impacted by the military culture. So we're going to be addressing those today. So with that being said, if you look towards the bottom of this slide, right, it could be effective nature-based for the following areas: mental and physical well-being to handle and work with stress and anxiety, aggression and depression, concentration, and also rehabilitation for disabilities. And when we talk about rehabilitation for disabilities, you're going to see some resources provided specifically that explore veteran approaches for those that have actually been physically disabled due to military connected, whether it's training or combat related experiences. Oh, sorry, Kelly, I think you're mute.
Oh.
There you go, now you're on.
That's so weird because I never muted myself. But just to add to that, some of the issues that maybe we're working with clients that we're incorporating nature, but we're not necessarily saying that it's the primary approach that we're using. So when we look at this literature and we look at what is out there, some of it could be dated or only focusing on specific issues. And we'll talk a little bit about how just the research in general is limited or dated, and it could be used a lot more than we're actually seeing it being used, but we definitely need more research out there to look at specific nature-based approaches and its effectiveness. So keeping that in mind as we go through, because we will talk a lot about different studies related to this group, but just note that there are some limitation and some gaps, and you guys will probably identify them as we share more.
So to kind of go on a little bit further about, Kellie was just saying, some of these gaps and, just these questions that might be coming up for you guys. Some of these gaps that we are seeing is a lot of the research is based on veterans, right? They're an easier population to get a hold of. There is no red tape, as we like to call it, us researchers. Department of Defense is very difficult to get permission to actually research active duty. So they have their own protocols and different things that you have to go through their own IRB. Many university IRBs actually consider the military population a vulnerable population due to those restrictions. So it's a very difficult task, very timely task, but it's much easier to get a hold of veterans because they're not, they don't have the same requirements in regards to certain policies and procedures they need to follow with command. So we're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit further. But with this slide, before we kind of bridge that way, we just wanted to give you some information in regards to what could nature-based interactions look like, right? So you have art, sports, dog. We talked about animal-assisted therapy before. Here's just some resources that, we have them in our reference list too if you want to look more into some of the studies done out there. But one of the things that I want to point out, just to kind of bridge that idea of what is effective for the military, is the idea of sports. Sports are that adrenaline junkie, right? It can create this rush. And that is really fitting to the warrior mentality. So military individuals, usually the service member, have this warrior mentality, right? Mission first, everything next. So this adrenaline feeling is a very safe place for them. Also, if you think about military, a lot of their training happens out in nature. Interesting, right? So that's a comfort place for them. That's where they know the rules. They know, what is out of place. Maybe not all of us will know that. I know I was thinking about one of the veterans I was working with not too long ago, and he had noticed something when we were just going on a walk, telling me that, something happened over there, and he was very concerned. It shifted our whole conversation. And it was because there was, trees are supposed to be up and down, and buildings are the only things that are straight, right? Everything is like aligned. So nature tends to have leaves and different things. So when something stood out as not fitting in that spot, something changed in the safe place for him. He was very in tune to it. So that emotional connection to his surrounding, I didn't really, I thought it was a building, right? It was different for me. But for him, it was a kind of this embedded feeling that we need to explore. How did this place change for them? So that's just something to consider. We talk about meeting our clients where they are, knowing our clients, that cultural consideration, multicultural competence. Really important to consider that. And very important still when you're working with the military population. Another thing when you're looking here, right? Military, they're used to being with groups, units, batteries. So that can be very supportive and engaging. It's a very familiar ground for them. However, you also have to be mindful that some of this can be embarrassing, right? It's the stigma there because they are a warrior. They are not supposed to need help. So that strength image, if they seek help, are they not a warrior anymore? So you have to understand where to balance that out. I used to laugh when I was working with one individual. He used to say, it feels good to just say I'm going horseback riding. And I was working with a group doing equine assisted therapy. And He says, because no one knows I'm really getting counseling. And it's like, that's a safe place for him. Nobody knows. And he was actually active duty. And he, it was one of those things, my command knows I'm going horseback riding and I'm not going through TRICARE. And that's, for those of you who don't know, the military's insurance provider. I'm self-paying and I am not walking anywhere into a clinical mental health office. No one knows. So it was very safe for them. So we're going to continue to explore some of these things, but just wanted to point some of these things out and how they relate specifically to the military. So as said before, nature is a huge, huge, huge component, right? So nature is considered the co-therapist. It is as much involved in the process as you are as the counselor implementing interventions. Nature in itself is an intervention, right? So when we think back to how did this all start? Well, back in 1989, nature-based interventions started to be actually applied. Interesting, right? Because people were doing it, but nobody was actually writing it down and documenting it. They never looked at it specifically as a source of an intervention, the impact. So for those of you who are researchers out there, we always look at variables. Nobody considered during this time, or I shouldn't say nobody, it wasn't really specifically a focus area as it being a variable where it was occurring. So once attention started to come into, if we were to move this therapy elsewhere, would we get the same result? That is indeed where we started to find the benefit of actually having nature in itself be therapeutic. So it's really a buffer from our daily stressors. It can be found to provide better sleep quality, decreased anxiety, and also ability to accept personal limitations. And that is a huge one, right? Specifically for the military, because no, they don't. They are warriors. They are strong. They are invincible. They are our protectors, right? They can do anything. So accepting a personal limitation is extremely insightful with working with this population, because it also allows them to address it doesn't change their identity. And that's a huge one. So from research, nature in itself has been experienced to be a very calming effect. And just some of the reasons that we have also mentioned before, that it's very, it's a norm for them. It's a safe place for them, and they know it. So this brings us back to that warrior mentality. I made the comment earlier about an individual who said, I am not walking into a clinical mental health setting, right? I'm not going into the office. They know I am just going horseback riding. Well, there's this stigma. If I am seeking mental health treatment, will I be considered unfit for duty? Unfit for duty means that you're going to be relieved of your service, whether you are reservist, whether you are active duty. Are you mentally incapable of fulfilling your duty, mission first? And that is a big, big fear. So this is something right there that will turn a lot of individuals in the military sector around. They worry, they fear, will my command find out? Who will know that I'm coming here? So some programs do have embedded, usually for counselors, it's contract workers. There is some psychologists throughout the military, and they service different units in different ways. Every branch is a little bit different where they come in and how they are utilized. However, the idea of having somebody to direct you in that route, right? So having, let's say, we have an enlisted, we'll say sergeant, right, kind of middle of the road there, has a couple years in, and he is, having a rough time. Maybe it's just with marital issues or financial issues. Well, if someone was to direct him to go to find that resource, right, for mental health, that is usually someone who's higher up, who then reports to someone higher up, who then reports to somewhere higher up. So there's this fear there. So everything is fine. Everything is fine. And they don't want anyone to know. So this is something that really is important for if you are not necessarily servicing a military concentrated area or an installation, because service members, whether they are active duty, reservists, or veterans, will seek civilian counselors for this very reason, because they have less fear in having those that they are surrounded with in regards to their career finding out. So they live among us. I said I'm a military spouse. We live in the community. We do not live on base. It's very interesting because where I'm located, we are a very big military installation. So there's many of us in the community, but there has been times before where that has not been the case. And it's a whole nother world for us living in a civilian sector. However, we still seek civilian resources, doctors, counselors. We go to the same food stores. So that's the thing. Knowing this population is really important because you never know when someone's going to walk in.
I think what else is interesting is we're talking about these embedded providers among units, which is a new concept to the military the past couple years. They're also, in order to increase resources or to decrease stigma in some ways, they're doing these integrated behavioral healthcare type settings. So it's not that the individual is walking into mental health, they're walking in to see a medical doctor, so to say, and then they're taken down hallways that connect to mental health. So that's just an interesting way of helping get people into mental health when they need services, to say that we are really trying to increase services and we're trying to destigmatize them in that way. But when we're looking at this conference and we're looking at ways to destigmatize mental health issues, is that really destigmatizing if you're providing avenues to get help in secret ways on military base? So it's just something that's interesting, that balance of making sure individuals get care, but also working against that stigma of what does care mean. And yes, it's important to get them care, but some people are seeing it as, well, it's more important that they get the care than we really address the culture around mental health and mental health issues. So we will talk a lot about individuals looking to community counselors and different ways to be removed from DoD systems as a whole. That's just something that I wanted to point out, doing a lot of work with military programs and seeing what they're doing to try to address change.
Thank you, Kellie, there. Great points. And I know I'm looking at the clock and we can just talk and talk and talk, right, about some of these things. So I'm going to kind of briefly touch on these. There is resources, once again, if you need to go further into them, if you want some more further background. But then so we can at least get to the implications and strategies for you guys. Right, we keep talking about military culture is different. They have their own values, belief systems. They even have their own language, right? So they talk a lot in acronyms. They call the restroom the head. They call moving PCSing. So everything is a little bit different. Their job is an MOS. Right? So understanding this is really helpful. So when you're having a conversation with them, you can follow them, right? Now, values and beliefs also differ per branch. So it's going to be very different between the Navy and the Marine Corps, than the Army, than the Air Force, National Guard, Coast Guard. It's going to differ. Important to know that. Also going to differ between subgroups within those. What's your rank? Are you enlisted? Are you an officer? What's your job, right? It's gonna differ. So being mindful of that is really important. Same thing for anybody you work with, understanding cultural competence. The next thing that I want to bring up is the idea of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So this is kind of their laws, right? We have our state statutes, they have state statutes too, but when they are active duty, they have these laws that they need to abide by. And when they are on the installation, things differ a lot than when you're out in town. They have different rights, different things. I often joke, I can tell a service member when he's active duty because every Monday morning his hair is high and tight, right? It's nice and good. Mine is not so much on a Monday morning. Monday mornings are usually rougher for me, but not for them. But they have to have a certain uniform code. Currently, thinking about COVID-19, right? I'm sure some people have been following. There's been a lot going on with the military and different things happening. So there is a non-movement currently. Nobody is PCSing. Nobody is able to travel, even if you're a dependent. The regulation came down as until May 15th, can no one travel. So there is accountability checks. I know my husband is on the phone every morning, and it's about from 5:30 to 7 a.m. and they have to round up who and where everyone is to get everyone accountable, to make sure everyone is good, and to also notate if anyone has been impacted or has any symptoms of COVID-19. A little bit different. That's not what I'm doing in my job currently. I don't need to know where everyone's whereabouts are and where they're going that day. But it's a different rule book that they live by. So that's something we need to consider. And during a time, right, the context of when they're coming is the idea that we need to understand when we are seeing them. And what I mean by that is they're coming during COVID-19 for services. Their experience is going to be a little bit different, right? And then the other consideration is whether you're Marine Corps, whether you're Army, whether you're Navy, everything is going to be a little bit different. So some of those acronyms and different things that we talked about earlier, and I actually see a note in the chat box, in regards to MOS being Marine Corps related, right? Yeah, every branch is going to have a different lingo. Do we need to be experts? No. Do we need to know where to turn to look for this information? Yes, right? We can have our clients be the experts and help guide us, but we need to also do our own homework so we can follow them and they don't feel like they're coming to a session to teach us. So intakes, biopsychosocials, finding out that background, not just saying, were you in the military? Getting more details so you know what they did in the military, how long they were in the military, what was their experience like, what was their occupation, what did they do, so you can do your homework so when they're talking, you could follow. Of course, you're always going to learn new things, just like we'll learn with any other new culture. But right, we do have that responsibility to continually, to professionally develop so our clients can feel supported. Okay. So military, I'm so sorry, guys. The joys of working from home, right, with everybody at home right now. He's very excited for this presentation today. So military-specific mental health issues. Some of the common ones, and you're going to look at it and say, hey, that's not much different than a civilian population. And that's true. Some of them, they just look different because of the fact of the context of it. So you keep hearing me say context. That's just something really important to understand with culture, right? Any culture, military culture as well. So mood disorders, trauma, PTSD, sexual assault, suicide, addiction adjustment issues, relationship concerns. One thing I want to point out, PTSD. I often look at my interns and they said, well, he has PTSD or she has PTSD. And we'll talk about, well, why did you go that route? Well, they were in the military and da-da-da, and it's like, okay, they're having marital issues. So why would we go PTSD? Well, they were in the military. That's a stigma, right? You can Google it, you'll find tons of things, military and PTSD. You often lack to see adjustment disorder. Anybody can have a difficult time in their marriage. This, no matter your population, your culture, anyone can have a financial issue. Anyone can have difficult time changing. So that is something to consider. Financial stressors can happen. Yes, they might be in the military. It does not mean they have PTSD. In fact, a lot of research is being found where some of the PTSD symptomology that veterans are actually experiencing are non-related to military. They're actually due to childhood experiences. So they have been unaddressed experiences that have kind of left to flabbergate over time and kind of become muddled by all their other experiences, and they've just left it unprocessed. It's unfinished business. So it's really interesting when, right, we just know a population, we think of, oh, that's a common thing, but sometimes it might be misdiagnosed. So that's where we also need to do that advocacy work and look at the full picture, look at the full scope. There's lots of homelessness in this population. There's a lot of financial difficulties. There's a lot of change with this population, right? So, and I see Carrie, I had a boss that said everyone who has seen combat has PTSD, right? And now we're looking at a lot of new research and we're talking about, is it PTSD or is it moral injury, right? What does that look like? What does that mean? Is that a feeling of guilt? There's a lot of guilt work out there right now. So it's really interesting. So we need to find out the context again, right? And that's where we come in. If you're interested in this population, advocating for knowing the whole story, looking at the context of it. So I am going to very, very quickly go through these. I know you guys are going to get, the PowerPoint is going to be recorded and they're going to be putting it on their YouTube channel. So you'll be able to see this. Just want to let you know, there is things out there. There are resources out there. There is research. Most of it, I know I talked about being adrenaline, you know, kind of rush in those sports. Nature, big overall thing that we need to remember is experience is emotionally calming for veterans. Now I'm saying veterans, I'm not saying active duty because there is limited research on active duty, right? There is limited research on family. However, you'll see that there is some, or dependents, there is some resources here for them. So outward bound experiences, wilderness-based courses, right? There's a research thing here for you. Adaptive sports, recreation, participation, that's there. We have animal-assisted therapy, climbing, adrenaline, right? That adrenaline, outdoor recreation, gaming activities, hunting, right? Especially they're finding hunting with like snipers and training in regards to the weapons, that it's very connective to them and it kind of brings them back to that point. And if they do have something related to that experience that was even negative, that's a way of even using exposure therapy, step by step. So being in the nature, kind of giving that same surrounding for them, working through those things. Sports and adventures training course. You keep seeing things related to adrenaline, right? So it gets them rushing, gets them kind of in their comfort zone, that warrior mentality. There's sports, there's different physical camps. There's also therapeutic fly fishing, winter sports clinics. There is so many different things out there. They even have groups out there for families where they will send you away and they do emotional connections, but they're in nature. They want to remove you from all of the noise, right? They actually sometimes ask you to take your cell phones. Here they are, put them away. And today we're going to have our session and we are going to be strictly in nature. So nature, once again, is part of the experience, the intervention. So I'm going to turn you guys on over to Kellie for a little bit.
And I'm going to start with a big question for you guys. So how do you offer nature-based approaches when you are confined to a counseling office or work with clients from a distance? So we want to hear from you guys. Is there anything that maybe ideas have sparked based on some of the conversation that we had earlier, but anything that you're doing that is nature connected or that you would say is nature based in counseling practice? Maybe it's easier to think of, you know, having clients do homework outside to engage in nature, than maybe it is for you to think of things that you bring into the counseling office. Both are virtual background with a realistic looking nature scene. That's an idea. Hikes, used to go for walks and do mindfulness activities. Very good. Virtual tours, gardens. Yeah, that's great. If we look specifically at virtual nature-based interventions, so switching gears just a little bit, you can really use technology. So think of being confined to the counseling office and maybe you don't have a pond or you don't have gardens around the building that you're allowed to access due to a number of liability issues, or maybe your client that you're working with has doesn't want to go outside or be seen outside in the therapeutic relationship. And all of those open up the idea for utilizing technology to provide clients with the experience of experiencing nature. And again, we want to make sure that we're matching their needs. So virtual interventions, they can be targeting very specific issues, sleep, anxiety. One really, really popular app that maybe some of you are familiar with and use is the Calm app. And how that works is it tells these really, really detailed and great sleep stories, and they're all very much about nature and helping you find ways to relax and get comfortable in order to go to bed and have deep sleep. So that's just a way when we're working and we're actually looking at the military population, and one of their top issues is sleep. This is a really different way to say, well, here's something that you could try at night if you can't fall asleep, and allow them to use the Calm app. Now, nature can also be considered primary or secondary when we're looking at our approaches that we're using. So animal assisted therapy, if you're engaged in walking your dog outside, nature may be considered secondary to that process. So we want to think of our client, we want to think of their needs, and we want to think about how they're hoping to have this experience. Is it physical, like they really need to be out there? Or can we supplement it in a way that they can use virtual interventions to fill that need? But again, being mindful, if we've got clients that are susceptible to migraines or they're limited in terms of resources, we wouldn't necessarily want to recommend things that may be a cost to them. So like if you're looking at these virtual reality modalities, you could potentially bring this into your counseling office. So you could buy one of these Google Cardboards, and maybe your client would be interested in doing that as well for themselves. But we want to be mindful of our clients and their resources and what works best for them. And I think it's a really great, I'm seeing in the chat, when we're looking at COVID-19 and we're looking at how a lot of counselors are struggling to meet the needs of their clients and doing telemental health. And when we're looking at these virtual means, it could be really helpful for our clients. Think of the people who are in New York who are stuck in their apartments on, the 20th floor, and they're able to look outside, but they're not necessarily able to feel the fresh air or hear the sounds of nature. These are all really good alternatives when we're thinking about how do we bring nature to our clients. And I want to walk us through an activity. This is something that you can do in the counseling office. This could be something that you do in telemental health. It could be something that you do for yourself if you're really struggling to get outside and experience nature. So I'm going to share a new little screen here. Oops. I'm going to open you guys up to the beach. So here we are here. This is just through YouTube, so you guys have access to it as well. Now, while we're doing this, I want you guys to really listen. You know, sitting in a very comfortable position, maybe closing your eyes if that's most comfortable to you, but really trying to listen to the ocean and put yourself in a place. So those of you who are looking, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? So I'm going to bring you guys back.
Our ocean does not want to turn off. It wants us all to relax.
Really done. I don't know where it's at. Let me just stop sharing this.
As Kelly is doing that real fast, I just I saw in the chat boxes that it's immediately relaxing. And you know, and for me too, I love the beach. That is definitely my go-to happy place. Um, but that's not for everyone. So that's something we need to consider too when we're doing these mindfulness approaches. We need to know our client. So I use the example in the chat box of, you know, if we had a client who had a near-death drowning experience, maybe that's not the most fitting if that's not relaxing for them. So knowing that about them, knowing their background, you can find out what works for them, what is best for them. And then there's tons of free resources out there. So you can adapt. I know I used to have a client who loved to go hiking and loved to go camping. And the idea of hearing an open fire crackling, he reminded him of good memories when he was a child and he would roast marshmallows. So that was kind of his happy place. And that's what he would use to go to a good place. For me, I thought of bugs. It was not my happy place. So it just looks different for every person, and that's something to be cognizant of. Seeing here, we have a comment in regards to a client being a biologist and the ocean is triggering for her, right? So knowing that is really, really, really important. So once again, going back to that biopsychosocial and ensuring that you are able to not only know your client, but know their needs and know where they're at, because they might be able to one day go there, but just not right now.
And if you don't want to necessarily use the beach or a visual or a different type of aid, you can really do the 5 sense activity on its own. So obviously I was asking you guys about sight, about hearing. Those are things that I could readily observe. But you can also just do the 5 senses with your clients and say, okay, really centering yourself, really grounding yourself. What are things that you see? What are things that you can feel? What are things that you can taste, smell, hear? I've worked with a lot of clients where they've really said there's these times where I'm very activated or I'm very anxious and I don't know what to do. And so by giving them this mindfulness based intervention to use on their own, they can really center themselves in the moment and really say, you know, I felt better because I wasn't, you know, I was hearing really loud noises, or like I couldn't focus, my sight was getting blurry. But once I just remembered that activity, I was able to feel better and breathe appropriately and then use the breathing techniques that we've used. So there's different ways that you could implement this based on if you're in the office, based on what your client finds effective and what your client really needs. And I think that's a really good point that you guys are making about making sure that you know your clients and what's triggering versus what's helpful. So virtual reality from a distance, these are just examples of different things that you could use. You could take it on a hike with you. You could be on an iPad. You could actually give your clients some homework as an intervention. So something that actually with a lot of college students, they've really enjoyed the process of gardening, like being able to do something to bring into their apartments or their dorm rooms to say, oh wow, I'm really connected with nature in a different way. I have something to nurture. There was one veteran that I was working with in practice, and he said, you know, I could never have a garden because I move so much. I've always wanted to have a garden. And it was so therapeutic for him to be able to go out there and plant his garden and watch it grow over time. And it was very healing for him to be able to watch it grow from a seed to its full size. And so again, this is just to bring home the point that nature is an intervention and we can really use it with our clients. We can really analyze how their experiences before and after using it as an intervention in order to see, does it improve mental and physical health? Is it able to change the individual's perspective? And we do want to note that there are some barriers. So ethical guidelines or organizational standards may have, you know, liability concerns against things like taking your clients for a walk. What happens if they get injured? Or funding requirements. They may say, well, that's a great idea, but you know, that's really expensive. If you want to build a garden with your client or you want to help them engage in nature-based activities, they're responsible for funding that or finding the space for that. And so confidentiality, say that they're like, oh, well, would you come to my home? You want to make sure, okay, like, do I feel comfortable doing that? Am I allowed to do that? How am I feeling about going to this place where my client's doing a lot of therapeutic work? Confidentiality, avoiding harm by going or not going, making sure if you're trying to implement these interventions, you've got a really strong informed consent that basically discloses what you're willing and able to do. And then two, knowing that what we talked about a little bit earlier, there is literature out there, and we want to make sure that we are using evidence-based approaches. So really advocating and being engaged in things where we can determine effectiveness. So if you're using nature as an intervention, maybe you want to add to the literature about some creative ideas that you've used and how effective they were proven to be to help us see reduced barriers to using nature as a therapeutic approach. And then just some practical strategies. So we talked a lot about using technology and then things you can do without necessarily relying on technology. So helping your client find a calm space that allows them to feel safe and feel grounded. That could be actually in nature, or if there's any sort of limitations, it could be to help them get something that allows them to do virtual nature at home. It could be prescribed as homework, or, you know, if you've got a place that allows you to go walk around a pond, that's excellent, and that's something that you could do. And then you could also bring it inside. So if you want to do gardening or, you know, a different version of sand tray, by bringing in water, sand, and allow your clients to engage in nature and techniques in your office, that's also a really good option. And when you're thinking of the clients that you're working with in terms of ages, you know, there's probably a lot more creative ways of how to do that. And we do want to note that nature-based therapies are effective. We want to note that there is literature that's supporting that nature has these regenerative properties that do truly improve mood and other mental health issues and concerns, such as stress, depression. It's very unique when we're looking at it compared to these traditional counseling approaches. So just looking at talk therapy, and now, oh, I'm actually helping my client build his garden that he's always wanted. They can be adapted to meet the needs of the individual. They can be adapted to meet the needs of a family. If family therapy is something that you do, helping the family identify something that they can do in nature together, build the garden together. And if they can be inside or outside. So asking those important questions of your clients, what are you hoping to get out of nature-based therapies? Is it something that you can watch over time? Is it something that you can help improve your quality of life inside? What do you want that to look like? And then just being mindful that there's a variety of different ways to go about that. So we are about time, but we did want to open up to you guys. Any questions, concerns, ideas, anything you want to revisit? Any unique clientele that you work with that you could think of using nature-based interventions with that maybe you haven't in the past?
Well, thank you guys so much for being here with us. You know, there's some great conversation in the chats. I know it kind of sounds different, all right, to bring the outside in when we're such, you know, parametered by so many policies and procedures of sites. However, you know, I really hope that something maybe walked away with you to work with any client that can really kind of open the doors to making counseling less threatening. You know, the biggest thing I am thinking about right now, it's so timely, right? Many states that weren't so big with distance counseling, teletherapy, doors are opening. But how do we get them to relax when social isolation is happening? Well, we can't connect with each other. So how do we connect with nature? What a great way to kind of bridge some of that loss right now many people are feeling. So our emails were in the front. I know they're going to post the recording. And if you guys have any questions or concerns or comments, or you just want to connect about it, we'd love to connect with you. And yeah, and thank you so much for coming today.
Just to second that, thank you. I did know that someone had mentioned in your intakes, how is there specific verbiage that you would use to allow them to go for a walk with you, for example?
So personally for me, you really have to know who you're working for. I do a lot of contract work, so every place is a little bit different. Every site is going to be different. So that's where you really want to talk to the administrators who are in charge of policies and procedures because of the fact of liability concerns. And there's insurance policies that say, hey, you can't do that, or you can't be unattended. Also deals with the population you're working with. If you're working with an extremely aggressive population, you know, being outside where you don't have security around may not be allowed. So that's where you have to get kind of creative, and how do you bring the outside in? I know when I was working in a psychiatric unit, the chairs and everything were bolted to the grounds because we had a lot of aggressive clients and patients. So what we would try to do is we did a lot of visual things. Or we would go talk by a window, right? The windows where you couldn't break them, they weren't glass, they were plexi. Safety considerations were taken into account, but we would be able to look out so we didn't feel stuck, right? We weren't stuck in the client's problem, very symbolic. We would talk about the weather outside. What do you think it feels like? They would tell me about, weather that they enjoy. Also a great way to find out about seasonal depression. When are they most happy? When are they not? So lots of different things to consider, but definitely speak. Just don't take your clients anywhere. Speak with administration policies, because you want to make sure that you're safe as well as they are safe, and that you're not breaking any rules along the way.
Thank you, guys. We want to be mindful of time for the next presenter, so we're going to make sure that we stop the recording and we log off so the next person can get started. But thank you guys so much. We really enjoyed having you today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.